Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. Like it or not, the number one skill you can have as a developer is the ability to interview well. Most recently, I found myself on the job market without expecting it. I was a victim of one of the many layoffs that you read about. In fact, I have an episode I'm going to drop specifically about that. I purposely don't like falling into the whole layoff, fear-mongering thing. And it really did happen to me. I got laid off with a ton of other people in an organization. The whole organization got laid off. Anyway, so sad. Too bad. Found myself, no job, just bought this business, Parsity, and thinking, what do I do now? I had a pretty cushy job as an engineering manager, making a really good amount of money. And I thought, okay, so now I'm back on the market and I got to prove myself again. Now, luckily, years and years ago, I became obsessed with interviews, like weirdly obsessed with them, because it became like this game to me. And I still think they are just a game, right? I've been on both sides of the interview table, both as an engineering manager and as the person getting interviewed. So I recently just accepted an offer, and I have a few more, it looks like, in the pipeline as well. And I realized that the same skills that I've been telling people to do for years and teaching people were the exact same things that came up in my interviews. Even now, I just took an associate director of engineering position. I interviewed for some senior engineering positions, a few at really big companies and a few at companies you've never ever heard of. The interviews are kind of the same. I've also done conversations with around 500 developers from all around the world. And I'm always asking, what was your interview? What I'm trying to say is, I know more about interviews than I think most people out there. The big problem is, though, 99% of the interview advice that you're getting is for the top 1% of companies, right? So the people with the loudest voices and the ones we're all really intrigued about are the guys that are at Google or the woman that just got into like Facebook or Netflix, whatever. And they're the ones with all the YouTube channels. So we get inundated with all this information about how to pass these particular interviews. And those interviews are really cool, in my opinion, because they are so standardized. The interview at Google, which I'm going to talk about, which is one of the worst interviews I've ever done in my entire life. The most embarrassing interview I've ever had by one of the worst, meanest people I've ever had in my life was at Google, which I'm going to get into in a second. But what I really want to talk about is how you can beat the interview for the 99%. Right? I'm not going to talk about Google beyond this terrible interview I had. I'm not going to talk about what it was like beating the Facebook phone call and getting onto the onsite. This is not going to be the reality for 99% of us. Most of us are going to work for companies that you've never heard of the name of, right? Every company is a tech company. And at Parsity, this is one of the reasons why we created a curriculum and a mock interview schedule that reflects the reality of the job market, not the stuff you see on YouTube. Anyway, no shade against those people, by the way. I love the products that help you pass those interviews. I was really obsessed with getting into Google at one point, and I almost did, which leads me to the worst interview I ever had was at Google. Somehow, in the second year of me being a software developer, Google phoned me, and I think it must have almost been a mistake. They basically just invited me to an on-site interview at the campus in Mountain View, California, with zero coding screening, which is unusual. Usually what they want to do is get you on a phone call screen and you do like a 45-minute session figuring out some sort of algorithmic style puzzle. They didn't do that with me. They said, hey, you know what? Just come on down. I don't know what the recruiter was thinking. I was 2 years into my career, barely knew anything. I was just not a very good developer. I was a worse developer at that stage than almost 100% of Parsity graduates that are just coming out of the bootcamp. And I'm confident when I say that. I was just not that good. I didn't even know what I didn't know. I had no exposure to a lot of stuff. And data structures and algorithms certainly wasn't something I understood. This is also around 7-8 years ago. So the landscape has changed since then dramatically. The company was still really, really competitive to get into, but the level of like preparation and all the material that you see out there just didn't really exist. Like Lead Code was still kind of new. There weren't a whole lot of programs out there that were offering like interview prep and things like that. It just wasn't a thing that people were like obsessed with like they are now. So go to the onsite, and it is a 5-hour onsite at least. So I drive to Mountain View, California, park my car, walk into the building, get my little badge for the day, and I walk into a little white room, kind of crazy actually, a little white room, like this nice hallway, and has a whiteboard in it. And I'm sitting there, interviewer comes in, says, hey, let's start. No get to know you. No like, hey, how are you doing? No like, hey, tell me about yourself. It's like, we're going to get started on some very difficult puzzles to solve with code. And by the way, the code you're going to write will not run in an editor. You're going to literally use this marker and use that whiteboard. That's changed a little bit since then. That is how a lot of these interviews will go at these really big tech companies. They don't care about your coding knowledge because they're like, we're going to teach you all this stuff anyway. We're so big, got billions of dollars. You're going to come in here, show us that you know how to do these fundamental programming tasks and have this base knowledge, and we'll just fill in the gaps. We'll teach you the rest. It's like, we don't care. We want to know that you have these standardized concepts down, right? And so I'm like, completely unprepared. I don't know what I was thinking. So, the first question is about like string manipulation, kind of easy. Something like, detect a palindrome. I'm like, okay, completely bumbled through that one. Terrible, just terrible. The next interview though was where things got really awful. Guy comes in. He looks upset already, just does not look happy to be there. He kind of lets out an exasperated sigh like, ugh. He's like, well, let's get to it. And I'm like, okay. He drops a piece of paper out of his pocket in his jacket. The piece of paper appears to be the answer to the problem he's going to ask, which I think is even stranger. I don't say anything, even though I should have. And he starts saying, okay, we're going to do a tree traversal type problem. It was basically like, imagine an HTML page, or an HTML page really is like a tree structure. How would you find a particular node in that tree structure that has this value? I had no clue about trees or how to traverse them, basically how to search through this type of data structure. And so I'm bumbling around and he's like, this is the problem. This is the problem with people that don't have computer science degrees. And I'm like, oh, I said, is that kind of like a prerequisite? He'd say, well, it should be, because this is exactly what we want to avoid. Like, it's obvious you don't know how to do this thing, and there's no way you're going to solve this. And I'm like, wow. And I was trying to be polite. I was also much younger. Nowadays, I would have told him like, hey, check this out, dude. Whatever you feel about me or my coding skills, we can end the interview, right? You can just end it. You don't have to be rude. I don't care who you are. And so then he gets on the board and he draws up the solution really quick and say, that's how you would have solved it. And he's like, we got half an hour left. Any questions for me? And I was like, not really. Needless to say, I didn't get the job, right? Now, he was a jerk. Let me be very clear. I don't care how smart you are. I could really care less. I've met a ton of smart jerks out there, and they are bad for teams. They think that their technical expertise gives them the ability or the power to be awful to people, and they are destroyers of teams. They are the worst thing you can do is add one of them to a team, and people allow them to come in and rot teams from the inside because they seem quote unquote smart. Oh, that person knows everything. If you think that one person on the team is the team, then you have some bad management issues. Anyway, guy was a complete jerk, but he was right. He was right. I didn't know my stuff. Like, he illuminated a serious flaw in my coding knowledge. I had zero clue about data structures and algorithms. In fact, I fell into that camp of people like, oh, those are so stupid to learn. Why would anybody need to learn that kind of stuff? That's not what real programming is. Real programming is me sitting down, and writing in my hoodie in my little office or something like that, or making real programs that people are going to use. And I wasn't wrong either. But here's the problem. The prerequisite to getting hired is proving that you can code in an interview. And it's going to go a little something like what I'm going to tell you for the 99% of us. So after that day, I was really jaded and really hurt too. I was at a company that I liked, and I've told this story a few times, but I knew it was time to leave also. So I started practicing interviews just on my own. I mean, I just started looking at sites and looking up questions online, trying to figure out what really goes on in a coding interview. The first one I got was complete luck, basically. I went in there. It was a JavaScript type question that they asked me. I kind of knew how to approach it, and it was over the phone, so I didn't have to actually write anything down. And that got me the job. And I was finding it really difficult to get the next job. And I never wanted to be in that position ever again. And I thought, what is the biggest gap in my knowledge? It is data structures and algorithms. So I spent $10,000 to learn it. Do I regret it? Not one bit. In fact, I had a buddy call me up recently and ask me about that. He knows the owner of the program that I went to, which I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I love that program. He's like, how much did you pay for that? I'm like, $10,000. And he says, why? I said, well, and he made me really think about it. I'm like, why did I pay that much money for that? And I did a cost benefit analysis, really. I thought, if I make a jump to another job and I'm getting paid, at the time I was getting paid like 60,000. I said, if I, invest in this thing and it gets me to 100,000 or, it gets me into Google or near it, I know my salary would jump tremendously by tens of thousands of dollars, at least just in that first jump. You compound that over years, over a decade. At the time I was like 31, 32. Then I'm thinking, well, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Because even if I don't land at Google, I'm going to land it somewhere better and have these skills. And he's like, yeah, that makes total sense, right? He's like, but you could have just learned that anywhere. You could have gone to like LeetCode or found some sort of like study guide or some article that told you these things. I'm like, yeah, but the problem with that to me was, what if it was just wrong, right? Like I wanted somebody to guide me and to hold me accountable while I was doing it, which is the exact same reason I think people join programs like Parsity or any boot camp, really, because yeah, you could learn it all on your own, but what if you learn the wrong stuff and go further off your path than you meant to? And at the time I was like, I don't even know where to start. Data structures, algorithms, like what do I do? Watch Harvard CS50, get a big book, get cracking the coding interview. I mean, where do I go? And how do I practice this to make sure I actually know it? And also, I only know JavaScript. So how do I learn that? So I had all these questions and stuff. And I said, I just need somebody to do it for me, to tell me what to do. And I'll just do it. An Interview Kickstart, by the way, not sponsored at all by them. Love the program. I don't know how it is now. I cannot vouch for how good or bad it is right now. All I know is that it worked. I went there, spent the money, blew a huge bag on learning data structures and algorithms, came out on the other end of it really, really, really confident. And I was like, okay, I get trees, I get linked lists, I get graphs, I get queues, I get stacks. I know some system design now. I've done all these tests. I get it. I finally get it, right? And now I'm really ready. So then on the next job hop, I'm going out there like a wild beast. I get back to Google. This time they give me a phone screen. I nail it. Go to Facebook, phone screen, nail it. Failed both on sites. Not a big deal. I had other company I was also interviewing for. My salary during this period went from 60 to 150K. That's in the period of 3 years. So that is 2.5 times what I was originally getting, all through interviewing. You might say that's crazy, that's unfair, that makes no sense. Like interviews are silly. Why can't they just ask you about the projects you've done and things like that? And it's just not reality, right? So we are in reality. So I want to tell you how you can study and beat the other 99% of interviews out there, because here's the truth about your interviews. Outside of those big tech companies, if you're interviewing for most of the companies that are currently hiring, which are really outside of tech, like ed tech is taking off, healthcare tech is taking off, government tech, e-commerce, all these industries that typically haven't really been at the forefront of tech are the ones that are doing most of the hiring. I actually got hired at a mortgage company most recently within their IT department, which is massive, right? Before that, I was at Clorox, their IT department, pretty big too, but I was on their web team, which is much smaller. But still, these are big billion-dollar corporations that you may have heard of, but you never think about their tech teams. These interviews aren't going to be like traverse a data structure in a board in a white room somewhere with a weirdo. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be remote. It's going to involve like really one of a few questions that we're going to go over. And it's going to go over some very, very common behavioral questions that you're going to get. To be completely honest with you, I did an interview yesterday while having this job because I interview throughout the year. I don't stop. Now, I don't interview crazy because you just burn out. But I do interview throughout the year because it's important, because it's like a muscle that you build up. First of all, interviews are weird. So I don't blame you for avoiding them like the plague. They're a very strange, surreal experience. And the only reason that I'm used to them now is from doing them so often, which is exactly why I suggest that you do them often. It's also why at Parsity, we started doing mock interviews, because it mimics the environment and the stress that you're going to encounter when you're doing an interview. Really, really important. The reason why you find anything scary is because you haven't done it enough. So like think about jumping off a plane or doing anything for the first time, your first day of school, your first day of work, your 100th day of work, things are whatever. You can go in there on a handstand, right? You can go in there and you feel totally confident. The first time public speaking totally freaks you out. The 100th time, it doesn't. Why? It's because it becomes normal. You normalize it in your head. It's like, this isn't a new experience. Your brain is wired to look at new things and think, I'm nervous about this. We've never done this before. I don't have like a template for this kind of activity. So what do? And interviews even add another level to it because you're being watched and judged by strangers on something that you value about yourself. So you've learned how to code, or maybe you're into your career and you're thinking, I know what I'm doing. Then you start to doubt yourself. Wait, do I know what I'm doing? Does this person know more? The thing is, you need to understand that these interviews are completely made up on the spot in many cases. Now, what I've noticed from doing so many interviews over the years, I mean, at least 100, right? And also being on the other side of the interview table and doing at least, maybe under 100, but somewhere near there as well, giving out interviews. And that's not even counting all the mock interviews I've done a ton. And they typically follow a pretty standard format, whether you're in the US or apparently even in like Nigeria or Pakistan. It's kind of crazy how interviews are kind of standardized even outside of big tech companies. But what I've noticed is a lot of times your interviewers just read something online and asked you the same question that they found online. They may not know much more than you do. And the way they're grading it can be completely arbitrary. I went to a company and we had a system to interview people. We had a bank of questions, but I don't know, we had no grading rubric to tell you whether you did really well or really bad. It was just kind of like, how do you think they did? Is this fair? Is it not? It's reality. So that's the other truth about interviews. The person on the other side of the table may not be as smart as you. They may not be as talented, and they may not even know how to judge your skills. But it's a game, and it's a winnable game. And I want to show you how to win. So here's what your actual interview is almost certainly going to be like, based on the hundreds of conversations I've had, the over 100 interviews I've done, and my most recent experience on the job market, where I just did 5 interviews in the last month and a half. So before the interview even starts, you're going to get a sanity check. You're going to have somebody call you up from the team, usually a recruiter, somebody that's not technical. And they're going to basically make sure, like, are you crazy? Or are they going to kind of check off some boxes and make sure that you have the basic skills that they're looking for? The worst thing you can do during this sanity check is to complain about your job, say that you're unemployed. Now, that's a really kind of a spicy one. I don't tell people that at all. I'd rather not, because I think it gives them some nervousness. I think it makes them think, why? And they have to explain why. I don't want to get into that kind of stuff. I want to get to the technical person as fast as possible. So if I can avoid telling them like that I was either unemployed or laid off, I'm just going to. If they ask you why you're on the job market, a lot of times I'll just say, layoffs have recently been happening. That's become such a common thing nowadays. The worst thing, again, you can do is say, oh, I hate my manager or something like that. And you'd be shocked how many people say stuff like that. Kind of ends the conversation right there. Also coming off as way too junior, saying, I'm looking for my first big shot in tech, and I'm really looking for a company to take a chance on me to help me learn. No one wants to help you out, to be completely honest with you. They want you to come in and help them out, because they're going to pay you a lot of money, almost certainly. So you want to come on strong, saying, well, I've learned about your company, and I think the product you guys are working on is really cool. I do this like 5 minutes before I get on the phone, by the way. Sometimes I don't even know the company calling me up. I remember we scheduled a call or something like that. I'm like, oh, I better go look them up real quick. I look up something about them. This always helps. And you just parrot back what you found on their website. Say, oh, I see that you guys do this, and I think that's really cool, and it interests me because I have a background in it, or I have a cousin that does that, or whatever. I'm just really interested in the technology that you're using. And I think I'd be a great addition to the team because, I'm one, really passionate about this industry or this piece of technology, and I have some experience that backs it up. It's going to make the person feel confident. Say, okay, you know what? Maybe this person could be a good fit. You just want to come off sane enough and tick off enough boxes on their checklist for tech items that they say, cool, let's get to the next step, which is the step we all care about, right? This is the fun stuff. The coding challenges, the coding test. So if you're on LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram, you're probably looking at all these dudes usually that are solving these algorithmic problems. They're like, how do you traverse a tree in O of n time? How do you reverse a linked list? and you're studying that kind of junk, first of all, just ask. Say, hey, for this coding challenge, what is the nature of this coding challenge? Will this be data structures and algorithms, or will this be more of a practical challenge? Will this be a take home? Like, can you give me some insight to what it is? And if they don't, they're kind of like, oh, don't worry about it. Just show up. Don't just show up. If they won't tell you, go on Glassdoor, go on teamblind.com, look up the kind of stuff they've asked in the past. I do this all the time because why would you not? Why would you want to leave this to chance? Remember, this is a game. You're going in this game trying to win. So you're preparing for the championship here. I also don't believe in studying data structures and algorithms or just coding challenges all year round. You'll burn out. So I think a week or two is sufficient for a big tech company, 2 months. But we're not talking about big tech companies. We're talking about the other 99% you're going to get. So getting ready for the coding challenge. Here's the coding challenges I always see come up. There's a few that I see way overrepresented in the coding challenges, and we'll get to the top one in a second. But some of the concepts you want to know, especially as a JavaScript developer, are working with objects in arrays. Like here's an example of one. We have 2 arrays full of objects. I want you to merge them by a certain key or something like that. Like let's say you have an object with a key of name Bob, and you have another array and it has an object with the name of key Bob, and they have some different values within them. They might want you to do something like merge these values together. That is such a common type of question that I've seen that comes up a lot. Working with objects in general, because I see that most questions that aren't like data structures require working with objects. So one thing that I would do to practice that kind of thing is, one, using the reduce method in JavaScript to take something like an array and then compose it into an object where the key is the value of the item in the array, and the the value is the index of the item in the array. If that's confusing to you or something like that, I want you to look up this particular problem, which actually is pretty representative of a lot of problems you're probably going to get. It's called toSum. TOSUM. It's on LeetCode. It's actually an easy one. And I think learning how to solve that problem with an object is going to lead you down the right path. So if you just look up that question plus how to solve with an object, I think that's actually going to prepare you for a lot of the types of questions you're going to get in the 99% of other interviews out there that are not for big tech, because it forces you to use an object as a way to modify, optimize a way of like looking for items in an array. Using objects is like such a overrepresented thing in these interviews that it's crazy. It's like, when in doubt, use an object. The other one I see represented a lot is something with 2 pointers in it. So this is something where they're like, find the largest and smallest items in an array or something like that, or find a section of 3 items that are a consecutive section of 3 items that have the largest sum. And this is when you have 2 pointers typically in an array, and you have a pointer in one index and a pointer at the other index, and then they'll be following each other along at some pace where they look at 3 items at a time. This can also be a sliding window type of problem. But if you look up how to implement 2 pointer solutions and how to implement a sliding window, I think that's going to help you out with a lot of the questions you're likely to get. Now, these are still less common than the one I'm going to get to right now. So if those are a little bit conceptual and you're thinking, I don't really know how to solve those ones, it's okay. Because I'm going to tell you the most common one you're going to get, and you're going to get this one. This is funny because before I owned Parsity, I was doing a program teaching software engineers how to pass these interviews. And it's really funny because yesterday, the question I got was the same question that I teach students at Parsity. It's the same question I had during my program when I was teaching people how to beat interviews. And it's the same question that I see over and over and over. It made me think, am I just really smart? Did people rip this off of me? Or did I rip this off of them? And it's still unclear to me. Maybe I've gotten so popular through my podcast and LinkedIn that somebody found that question and they've been using it, because I swear to God, everybody's been getting this freaking question. And here it goes. I got it yesterday. And I've had it for years now. It goes a little something like this. This is a React.js question. It goes, you come in the interview and they're going to say, okay, we're going to build a component. That component's going to fetch some data and we're going to manipulate that data. Now, even more specifically, It's going to be a list of to-do items. Those to-do items will have a completed and a not completed checkbox. I want you to write the code that when you click the button to check off the item, it has some visual cue that it is checked off. Maybe a line goes through it or something like that. And when you click it again, it toggles the item back off. You'll get some variation of that question. It is like uncanny how common that question is. I literally got asked it yesterday and I passed naturally, right? But some variation of that. So you're fetching some data from a third-party API. You're showing it on the screen. That part should be what you're breezing through. If you cannot breeze through that, I want you to go on Code Sandbox. I want you to do that because that's going to prepare you for the step one. Now, that's just to get past the easiest stuff. Step two is when you can click on a checkbox that marks it completed or not completed, and you can toggle it on and off. That's where most people fail because they don't understand how to set state on a large array of objects and do that. Now, there's plenty of ways you can figure that out. And I could explain it to you over audio, but that's not really helpful. This is something you should really look up or just do on your own. There is an API out there, a free one. Type a code, typicode.com, and you can find the API endpoint there that is for free. That actually I think I just had an epiphany here. There's a couple free APIs that are like placeholder APIs. And I think the reason we keep seeing that question pop up is because of that freaking API. So thank you out there to the people that made that, because it's made doing these interviews just that much easier, right? Okay. So that is the question that you should be preparing for the most. And you might think, why React? What about Angular? What about Vue? What about Ember? Yeah, these are frameworks for sure. Does anybody really use them? I'm just mean. Of course, people use these frameworks, but the reality is front-end development has become synonymous with React.js development. So you're way more likely to see that particular question for React than you are to see really anything else. Can't speak to the Angular.js or Angular community and the problems they will likely encounter in an interview. But for most of us, the majority of us that are React developers, and I know the majority of us are because React is like by far the dominant JavaScript framework out there, that's a question you're going to see. So get ready for it, right? Now, I had a few interviews that didn't have any coding questions, like none. In fact, the job I landed didn't really have any coding questions at all. And also yesterday, I was unprepared. I almost bombed the interview because I wasn't prepared for one of the behavioral questions, which I tell everybody else to prepare for. I didn't take my own advice like a fool. I was like, I can't believe I'm getting asked this question that I've told people to study for, and here I am completely unprepared for it. Now, in my associate director interview, I had written out like literally bullet points for all the questions I thought they could ask, and I was spot on, to be honest. This is not rocket science. In fact, I think you're not going to be super surprised by these questions, but these are the behavioral questions which dominate the tech space that you're going to get asked. Number one, tell me about a complex project you've worked on. This should be easy. It sounds like it should be easy, but when you get asked it and you didn't study for it ahead of time, you're going to probably flail around like, And what a lot of people do is they think, what was most challenging for me, right? So as an individual, you might think, well, it was really hard for me to learn TypeScript. I heard this a lot actually when I asked this question myself. People would say, it was really hard for me to learn TypeScript. And yeah, that was a challenge. That was the most technically complex thing I did. I had a project where I had to incorporate TypeScript, and that was tough. And it was tough because, I didn't know TypeScript, so I had to learn it. And the interviewer will nod their head and say, okay, cool. And they're not satisfied at all. That's not a satisfactory answer at all. What they're really trying to get at, and I have a worksheet that I'm nice because I know that you're a smart, good-looking person listening to this podcast, and I've attached it to the show notes in this podcast because, again, smart, good-looking people probably listen to this. I hope you are. If you're not, please don't download it. But if you are, it's at the bottom and it will tell you how to compose a behavioral story, because I see this one as a big, big gap in a lot of people's knowledge. They might study for all the coding stuff and completely fail on this stuff, which is equally important. And it could be your entire interview, by the way. It was for me a few times. So what they're looking for is to give me an example of something you've done that makes me trust you as an engineer. Because they've worked on things that are complex themselves, that they consider complex. They've worked on pipelines for deploying code. They've worked on difficult bugs. They've worked on big process changes that have changed the way that they've written code. They've done all these things that make them feel secure in their own engineering. And they think, if this person has done something similar, I can relate to them and therefore I can trust them. So how do you do that? You graduated a boot camp, or maybe you have a couple years in your experience. You need to write down a story that shows a struggle. It should be a story, first of all. It should be like the problem, how you solved it, what was the outcome, what were the tools you used, what would you do differently later. Ideally, this goes into a few buckets of work that you could have done. Something with deploying. So whether you deployed something on AWS or Vercel or even Heroku, if you went to a boot camp. Are people still using Heroku? We stopped using that at Parsity, by the way. We're using Vercel and render.com, by the way. And we're also going to be using AWS soon. If your boot camp is still using Heroku, please get off and use something else. But you want to try to think of a story that fits into deployments, maybe involving unit testing, maybe involving using a Git strategy, maybe involving writing a complex feature and why it went wrong and how you saved the day. So for my story, an example might be like, tell me about a really complex project you worked on. Say, well, when I first started my most recent role, we had a code base that had a lot of duplication throughout it. So one thing I did was compose it all into a component library. This allowed us to share logic and UI throughout our entire code base, and it reduced the amount of duplicated code by a third. We had 3 websites, and now we could compose all that code, put it in one place, and then we could go much faster. So it sped the team's delivery up. It also took out code that was error prone that we'd have to fix in 3 different places. And, that was actually one of my most proud achievements at the company, right? And I think it really helped the developers, with their workflow. And they might say, well, cool. Well, how could you improve on that? Might say, oh, you know what? I should have chosen to do X, Y, and Z with the component library. I probably shouldn't have used styled components because we were doing X, Y, and Z. Or, I wish I had added more unit tests. That's one thing I would have done because X, Y, and Z. What is the benefit? So the story is always like struggle, solution, outcome. What would you do better? Right? Not, I had a hard time learning TypeScript. That's just not a good story. It just makes the person think, well, I think TypeScript's easy, so you think it's hard, and therefore I don't think you're going to work here. I'm just telling you how people think, right? I'm just telling you the reality because there's too much fluff out there about what people say what should be. What should be is not what could be is not what is. Is that a poem? I don't know. So this is another behavioral question you're going to get, which is like the one you're going to get everywhere from McDonald's to like a software company. Tell me about a conflict you had and how did you resolve it? This one people flub on a lot. They say, oh, I've never had a conflict. Well, make one up. You don't have to have had the conflict. Just make one up. They ask this to kids that go to McDonald's. My son recently went for an interview at like a fast food place or something like that, or his cousin did. And they said, tell me about a conflict you had, in your life and how did you resolve it? He said, well, I've never really had one. Wrong answer. You need to make one up if you don't. And if you really don't, it's up to you. Do you want to tell them, well, I've never really had a conflict like that at work? And they say, oh, okay. Well, I guess that's not a question I can grade you on. Or do you want to say, yeah. So what they're looking for in this one is how do you disagree and commit? Disagree and commit is a popular phrase, ideology within software where you might have 2 opposing ideas and think, okay, well, we have to come to some agreement, but who's going to win and who's going to just disagree and commit? And how do you come to the decision? Because often what happens on teams is the loudest voice or the person that has the most passion about a particular technology just wins. And so usually what you want to do is go through your process about the conflict, your mental process to understand what is the best thing to do and how do you arrive at that decision and how do you use logic to win your opponent over, or how do you maybe even say, my logic was perhaps flawed and I actually decided to do that. So I had a story like where I wanted to introduce CI/CD. Everybody loves CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, basically the ability to produce code and deploy it out to the web or wherever very quickly. And I was fighting for this at work and the principal engineer says, I don't think that's a great idea. And here's why. Because we don't have the tooling, the observability tools to make sure that the code you're pushing out at such a breakneck pace will actually work. And that's going to not work. And I thought, well, we can't just, release code once every 2 weeks. That's not acceptable. How do we come to some conclusion? So what we did was we decided what is the cadence we can release code that's going to work out. And I can go through a whole story about that kind of thing. But that's one of the conflicts I have that really shows like, oh, well, that's how I communicate. That's how I come to agreements with people. I didn't say the worst answer you could probably do is like, well, we couldn't decide. So we asked our manager and we said, hey, I think this is good. And he said he thinks this is good. And they, decided that I was right and he was wrong and I won. Yeah, that's right. Dummy. That's not going to make you look too good. So don't do that. And the last one is company culture fit. You're going to get asked in some way why you want to work there. And this question can be important or not important. The smaller the company is, the more important it is. Here's the best hack I can think of for nailing this question really well. Literally going on their company page, going to their values section, about us or something like that, and just saying exactly what they said in that value section back to them in some way. They might say, we value grit and timeliness and code quality and cleanliness. And you say, well, one of the reasons I want to work here is because of the engineering excellence. And I know that you value X, Y, and Z. These are also things that I value. I'm not telling you to be like super fake or lie during interviews, by the way. I just know it's a game. I've played it and I've won it, and I want you to play it and I want you to win it. Because what good is learning how to code, getting to the interview, spending all that time, money, effort, and then failing it? So why, right? I want you to win. I know what it's like to lose, and I know what it's like to win. And I see how quickly it can accelerate your salary, to be completely honest with you. It is, unfortunately, like I said, the number one skill when it comes to making money in tech is knowing how to interview very well. That's why there's so many programs that charge a lot of money. I'm thinking of actually doing a program like that for the 99%. If you're interested in it, let me know, because I would love to do this again. I love it, these interviews things, and I see how much it helps people out. I helped one guy go from like 60 to 113,000, so almost double his salary. I helped one guy get out of a terrible startup, and now he's at Calendly. Calendly is a pretty sweet company, very, very well known. I use their product. I helped another woman go from, a company she didn't like to a really fast forward tech job at like in the United Arab Emirates. I've helped a ton of people out beat this stuff. And I've done it myself. Like, I've done the thing, right? I know how to do it. And I just recently did it again. So I feel pretty confident in my ability to help people out do this. And I would love to help people out to do this as well, because I think it can give you a ton of confidence, increase your money. I don't see any downside to learning it. And by the way, I'm not charging $10,000 at all. I'll be charging something like, I don't know, $1,000 to start. Maybe take like 10 people, teach them these basic things on how to beat these types of interviews that I see overrepresented. Basically make sure they do the work so they can actually go out there and win. And then even if they don't have an interview coming up, they can just take that same stuff and apply it when they do have an interview going up, just like I recently did. Anyway, interviews have been on my mind a lot recently because I just did a bunch of them. And it was really comforting to know that, okay, I still got it. And some of the same stuff I've been teaching is still happening. And it's crazy, like just how much it fit right into a lot of the advice I've been giving. And it also showed me I need to take my own advice. Okay, last thing. If you want to practice with a human, and hint, hint, you should, because that's the only way you're going to get over your nerves. Half the interview is nerves, by the way. So don't drink coffee beforehand. Maybe do some push-ups or something like that beforehand. I like to take a little walk around the block, something where I can kind of relax. I don't like to look at my interviewers like I used to, because it makes me a little more nervous. If I see that they're really like up there, it makes me a little more apprehensive. I get a little nervous, like, oh, maybe this person's probably so smart that, how can I impress them? So I don't want to know too much about them, honestly. And then I use Pramp.com. Again, I'm not sponsored by Pramp.com. I think it's an excellent free service you can use that you pair with an actual human that's a stranger, and they ask you questions. The questions I don't think are going to be representative of what you're going to get in an actual interview. But what you're really doing here, remember this, what you're really doing is getting over your nerves of having a stranger judge you in person while you code. There is nothing like that experience that you're going to get. Now, we do it at Parsity, and when people do it with me, if they've seen me a lot, it's not as intimidating. We have other mentors do that now, and ideally someone they haven't worked with. That way it more mimics that experience and some of that fear. You do it enough times. You do this like once a week, which I did when I first got laid off. I was doing this once every week, and it made me feel so much more comfortable when I got to my real interview. Remember, you are not going to be getting asked those data structure and algorithm type questions. Anyway, I really hope that's helpful. I hope if you're on the interview circuit, this gives you a path that you can go down to win the game. And if you want more help, always reach out. And if you're interested in that program that I'm talking about, that I'm thinking of, let me know. Because if I get enough people that are interested, I'm doing it. And it's going to be awesome. I promise you it's going to be better than everything you've seen out there, because I don't see anything out there that's teaching this stuff. It's kind of crazy, actually. It's like people are just learning through trial and error, which is expensive. Anyway, see you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out varsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it.